Hello, everyone. We'll start in about 2 minutes for Mike Sielski and Kobe Bryant in the pursuit of immortality. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Chaucer's Books virtual author discussion with journalist Mike Sielski. I'm just going to turn on the little recorder here. My name is Michael Takeuchi, and I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Bookstore, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California. To purchase tonight's book, to browse other titles, or check out our upcoming events, please go to our website at chaucersbooks.com. While our guests and I are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's event is also being simulcasted on and recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available to view after program's completion. Post any questions you have in the chat, and I hope to get to those as well. So let's begin. Just over 2 years ago, the world was shocked and saddened upon learning about the helicopter crash that killed basketball great Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, baseball coach John Altobelli, his wife, Carrie, and daughter, Alyssa, along with Christina Mauser, Sarah Chester, and her daughter, Peyton, as well as the helicopter pilot, Ara Zaboyan. The most noted person, of course, was Bryant, who was lauded and mourned around the world. People of all walks of life and levels of fame expressed themselves heartfeltly. But the one telling void not heard from the voices who knew him was those before he became the Hall of Famer, the people from his youth and high school days. And that's something that I kind of missed, and I was hoping to hear a little bit more from, because as somebody who's run into Kobe from time to time as a reporter, I've watched him grow and go from a young man who could be cruel, who can be funny, but who can be impatient, to a very gracious man who became an ambassador of the sport. But through this whole career of watching Kobe Bryant, I wanted to know what made this guy tick. And thanks to journalist Mike Sielski, I got a great picture. Come on out, Mike. Hi,
Michael,
welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Michael.
So your book is incredible, The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. You've been a columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer for a number of years. You're Associated Press sports editor, top sports columnist in the country in 2015. You published other books too, but this book was really an opus for your career. Publishers Weekly called it a riveting chronicle. Sielski lends pathos to a celebrity player known for stoicism in the face of pain. Fans will relish this nuanced take on an oft overlooked part of the legend's remarkable story. So congratulations, what a great book.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It was given the topic and the subject and the context, I hesitate to say it was fun to write, but it was fascinating. It was a great journey to go on.
So how did it come about? I heard you came in possession of some interviews a treasure trove of interviews, because there's no way, obviously, you can't interview Kobe, but you had all these interviews of Kobe.
So, all right. So it's a very long story that I will try to keep as brief as I possibly can.
Oh, embellish.
So, back in 1996, when Kobe was in his senior year at Lower Merion High School, he had a friend and confidant, and actually an assistant coach on the basketball team named Jeremy Treatman. And Jeremy was kind of an assistant coach, but he was more like a media relations liaison between Lower Merion and Kobe and the people who were covering the team and covering Kobe and wanted to write about him. Jeremy would handle all the interview requests, things like that. And he and Kobe became very close. So during that senior year, Jeremy got the idea to try to collaborate with Kobe on Kobe's memoir. And it would be all about the transition he was making from high school to the NBA. In fact, Jeremy even had a title for it. It was going to be called My Freshman Year in the NBA. So he and Kobe did a succession of interviews over 1996 and into 1997, all about Kobe's senior year, his thoughts about making the jump, his family, all these sorts of topics. And Jeremy recorded all of them on a micro cassette recorder on micro cassette tapes. As it turned out, the project fell through. Bad timing, couldn't get a publisher, things like that. Jeremy took all the tapes. He transcribed some of them, but not all of them. And he took the transcripts, put them in one box, kind of kept them, took the tapes, threw them in another box, and put them away and forgot about them for the better part of 25 years. So I've known Jeremy since 1996. I met him when I was an undergraduate at LaSalle University, and he was the LaSalle men's basketball team's play-by-play voice on radio. And he would tell me about knowing Kobe and their relationship and things like that. And Jeremy and I stayed friends over the years. He basically became a basketball promoter. He would schedule and promote high school and college basketball events, big time, 8-team tournaments, 4-team events. They'd involve the best players around. He scheduled a game for LeBron James when LeBron James was in high school, and Kevin Durant and Tracy McGrady and all these guys.
Wow.
So after Kobe died in January of 2020, I was writing several columns about him for the Philadelphia Inquirer in the aftermath of his death. And it kind of hit me that the story of his life before he got to the Lakers was one that it felt like I knew really well because I had grown up and worked in the Philadelphia region for so long. But I wondered if the rest of the country or even the rest of the world knew it all that well. And so I got the idea for the book. I thought, let me try to do Kobe's origin story. I felt like if I could tell the story of the first 17 years of his life, if I told that story the right way, someone would be able to read it and understand the man and the figure and the athlete that he became from the time he really entered the public eye when he joined the Lakers when he was 17 years old until the day he died at age 41. So one of the first people I reached out to, maybe the first, was Jeremy. We've stayed in contact over all these years. And he immediately gave me the transcripts, the partial transcripts of some of the interviews that he had done with Kobe. He said, I'll give you these, but I can't find the tapes. I don't know where they're at. I'll look for them, but I don't know where they are. So that was in April or May of 2020. So I continue going on my research and doing my reporting for the book. I'm talking to more than 100 people. I'm spending hours in the Lower Merion Historical Society, paging back through old newspapers and yearbooks and all kinds of research. I'm going to Kobe's old house at 4:30 in the morning to drive from his old house to Lower Merion High School to trace the route that he would take to get to school early so that he could open the gym and shoot baskets for an hour or two before school even began. So I'm doing all this and I'm plugging away in the manuscript. And on December 22nd, 2020, 3 days before Christmas, I get a phone call at 8:30 at night. It's Jeremy. He's been cleaning out his garage in his townhouse in Philadelphia because he's moving to Boca Raton, Florida. And he says, Mike, I found the tapes.
Wow.
They were in a box on a shelf in his garage. And so the next morning, I put a mask on against COVID and I drove over to his townhouse. And he handed me a giant Ziploc bag with about 20 microcassettes in there with some derivation of Kobe written on all of them. And there were in total about 5 to 6 hours of interviews between him and Jeremy, talking about, as I said, closeness of Kobe to his mom and dad, his first impressions of meeting Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson, his first impressions of Del Harris, his first coach with the Lakers, his senior prom date with Brandy, all kinds of things. And so I was able to take those tapes, listen to them on my own, transcribe as much of them as I could, and then weave that perspective and texture into the narrative of the book.
So when you first heard his voice, what were your thoughts when you heard this young, he sounds, I've heard your podcast, by the way, Mike, you have a podcast that has some of those voices on so people can listen to it. So please, what's the podcast?
It's called I Am Kobe. It's 12 episodes, 10 that are a straight narrative and 2 bonus episodes. And they're all about, it's kind of a complement to the book. It's about Kobe's early life, but through a slightly different prism than the book takes it. It examines it a little bit more through the prism of his friendship with Jeremy. But on the podcast is largely built around the sound of these tapes of Kobe's interviews.
And they are quite remarkable, but I want to know, what were your thoughts when you first heard these tapes?
Well, I mean, I got chills listening to them. Someone asked me last week, did you get someone to transcribe them for you? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I wanted to hear Kobe's voice. I wanted to experience what it might have been like to listen to him say these things to Jeremy. And one of the things that stood out to me was he and Jeremy did most of the interviews in the summer or the late spring of 1996, kind of right in the aftermath of Kobe's final season of high school basketball, into the summer as he gets drafted and ends up with the Lakers. But he did a few other interviews in March of 1997, after he was already in the NBA. Kobe, who's already in the NBA, sounds much, much different from the Kobe who hasn't entered the NBA yet. His voice is deeper. His speech patterns are different. I don't know of another way to describe them other than they're a little bit more street, I guess. A little, he's using more slang, I guess you'd say. And he sounds more like a man, like whether he's affecting that or that's just naturally the way he sounds based on his environment, I don't know. But the difference was kind of stark. But all throughout them, you're getting these insights into his relationship with his mom and dad and why he's so close to them and how they've taken care of him for all his first 17, 18 years. Why he thinks Del Harris, his first coach with the Lakers, is holding him back. That he doesn't want Kobe to succeed because he's telling Kobe that he dribbles too much and shoots too much and does all these things. His first impression of Shaquille O'Neal, he calls Shaq his big brother, which is quite striking given the nature and tumult of their relationship over their careers together in the NBA. So there's a lot of that on there. He talks about why he loves basketball and what it was like to be a high school student at Lower Merion and some of the adjustments he had to make, and his classmates' reaction to his prom date with Brandy. He resented the fact that they resented him, that he heard from his classmates that they felt like he was turning their prom into a show all about him. And he resented them for that, for thinking that way. So there was a lot of insight like that.
Well, it's also, you mentioned in the book that how everybody, when Kobe and Brandy showed up, they fawned all over Brandy. And I think that you had mentioned that Kobe was really upset about that because, they were bad mouthing him. And then she comes along and they, it's just kind of a two-faced thing.
Yeah. And of course, the ultimate irony of of his reaction to that is that the prom date was a publicity stunt. It was set up basically by a promoter who Kobe had met and who had ties to the R&B group Boys to Men. So the promoter basically set this date up. He overheard Kobe. Kobe told him that he had a crush on Brandy. The promoter says, "Ooh, I see an opportunity here." He basically arranges the date between Kobe and Brandy in the hopes that Kobe will hire him as his publicity person. And so it's the irony, of course, is that Kobe says, well, why are my classmates reacting this way to my prom date? They shouldn't react this way. complaining about me getting all the attention, but Kobe did it basically for the attention. That's why he and Brandy did it.
So you're pretty much the same age, and you grew up in the same area. And how familiar were you with Kobe and his exploits? I'm sure, being a sports guy, you knew a lot about Kobe when you were in high school and you were in college.
Yeah, I didn't know as much about him in high school because I'm 3 years older than him.
Okay.
I was a senior in high school when he was a freshman. Now, his second high school game ever was against my high school, Upper Dublin. And there was video of that surfaced within the last few years that was really kind of revealing. It's a shot of Kobe watching the video of his second game, and it's pretty remarkable. If you should search on YouTube, you'll be able to find it. But anyway, when Kobe was making his rise at Lower Merion, I was an undergraduate at LaSalle University in North Philadelphia. And Joe Bryant, Kobe's dad, was the assistant men's basketball coach at LaSalle. So at the time, those of us who followed the men's basketball team and cared about basketball at LaSalle, and I was a writer and editor for the student paper, so I covered the team. We were all kind of operating under this delusion of grandeur that Kobe was going to come play for his dad at LaSalle one way or another, whether Joe was still the assistant coach or whether he turned out to be the head coach, or one way or another, maybe Kobe will come to LaSalle and he'll turn us into a college basketball powerhouse. And then by the time Kobe was a senior, as I kind of get into in the book, that was really never going to happen. We didn't know that at the time, but behind the scenes and in Kobe's own thinking, he had ruled that out entirely.
So I'm sure, as a college basketball fan of LaSalle, you were pretty devastated when you found out.
I mean, I was. My dad was a LaSalle alum. I have two uncles who were LaSalle alums. My younger sister went to LaSalle as well. And I was very familiar with the tradition of the university's basketball program when I went to school there.
Yeah.
And, I'm covering the team. The team was in a bad way. They had been pretty good in the late 80s and early 90s, but now they had fallen off. And we all thought on campus that Kobe was going to be this savior. And what you have to remember, Michael, is that this was a huge deal in the Philadelphia area at the time. There was kind of this presumption that Kobe might go to LaSalle or certainly might go to college. And by the time he's a senior, he's not as well known, he's not as well covered as you might think through the first 3 years of his high school career. But by the time he's a senior, he's the biggest basketball star in the greater Philadelphia area. The Sixers are terrible. Nobody really cares about them very much. And he and the Lower Merion Aces are like the traveling roadshow of Philly hoops. And so the idea that Kobe might go there or might go to Duke or might go straight to the NBA had become, by the end of his senior year, a huge, huge story.
Earlier, you just mentioned his father, Joe Jellybean Bryant, who was quite a talented player. I vaguely remember him when he played for the Sixers, but his career didn't exactly pan out the way he expected. And I think it seems to me in your book and some other things I've read that, he felt that his situation should have been better for who he was, and it wasn't. Were you able to talk to Joe at all about?
I would have loved to. At the start of the process, I wrote a letter and sent samples of my writing to the Bryants, to Joe and to Pam, and by proxy, their daughters, Kobe's sisters, Sharia and Shea. And I said, I'm going to be doing this book. It's all about Kobe's early life. I would love to be able to talk to you for it. And I never heard back from them directly. I heard through intermediaries, friends, Kobe's cousin, John Cox, who was kind of like his little brother when the two of them were growing up. I heard through intermediaries that Joe and Pam knew I was doing the book, but I never heard from them directly one way or another. I would have loved to have talked to Joe.
But you captured it so well, so I'm wondering how you're able to do that about Joe's life.
Well, I did several interviews. I spent several hours at the Temple University Library, which is the only library in the country that has preserved clips from the old Philadelphia Bulletin, which back in the 1970s was the largest afternoon newspaper in the entire United States. and they covered Joe Bryant like he was Michael Jordan, and they were the Chicago Sun-Times. I mean, there were just dozens upon hundreds of articles about Joe, because he had been a high school superstar in Southwest Philadelphia, and he had been a great player at LaSalle in the early mid 1970s. But you're right, he enters the NBA, and the NBA kind of doesn't know what to do with him because he's 6'9" tall. And when you were 6'9" back in that era of the NBA, coaches would just put you near the basket because you were pretty tall. They assumed you played in the post and would shoot layups and dunks and hook shots. And Joe was mobile. He could run the floor. He could shoot from the outside. He could pass. He could go behind his back. He was very gifted. He was kind of an iteration of Magic Johnson before Magic Johnson came along. And that's where he wanted to be. And he was also kind of, not to be too harsh, but he was kind of a flake. He was the kind of guy who'd miss the team bus for practice and didn't always work as hard as he needed to work. And one writer described him as, Joe was the kind of guy who had 2 minutes for everybody and 2 hours for nobody. And so he doesn't, and he feels like his talents are being wasted in the NBA, which is why he and the family moved to Italy, in 1983, so that he can play professionally there and kind of have his skills fully realized, in the leagues over there. And that's a motivating factor for Kobe. Joe and Kobe are very close when he's young. Kobe hears his dad talk about this. I didn't get the shot I should have gotten. I wasn't treated the way I should have been treated. And Kobe regards that as, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, he wants to redeem the Bryant good name in basketball, so to speak. But the other side of it is he also kind of sees Joe as a cautionary tale, that I'm not going to let happen to Joe what happened to me, what happened to Joe. And so there's the Mamba mentality. There is working hard. There is doing everything he possibly can at the earliest of ages to prepare for that. And I think to a degree, he can thank his mother, Pam, for that. Pam was the strong-willed member of the family. She ran the household, raised devoutly Catholic, very much a disciplinarian for her 3 children when it came to academics and their behavior and things like that. So he got the mentality from her, but he got the talent and the experience and perspective from Joe. And you put those two together, and that's a hell of a cocktail when it comes to creating a basketball player.
Oh, yeah. And one would have to wonder, if Joe was more successful in the NBA, what would Kobe have achieved?
That's a great question.
You don't know, because if his impression would be much different from what he received than watching his father struggle in the NBA and then going to Italy.
Right. Well, Italy does so much to mold him and shape him, both as a player and as a person, right? Like he doesn't, when the family moves back to Lower Merion Township in the late fall of 1991, Kobe's in 8th grade. It's the middle of the school year. So he finishes out the school year and then he's going to high school. He has not had the upbringing that any of the black students in the school district have had, or that any of the white students have had, that really any student has had. These 8 years that he's lived in Italy, the family would come home every summer for a little while, but then they'd go back. They themselves were generally the only black faces, or among the very few black faces they would see in Italy. They became a very close unit, the 5 of them themselves. But it also taught Kobe, in a way, not to see color, how to get along with people who don't look like you, who are from a different culture than you. And so when he does come back to Lower Merion, from a social standpoint, there is definitely some adjustment, and he's a bit of an alien, kind of a fish out of water. But that experience in Italy does allow him eventually to kind of move through different social groups with relative ease. Some of that is his background, some of that is his personality. I think I used the line in the book, he tried on personalities like he was trying on clothes, trying to figure out where he fit in with who, and kind of meeting people where they were. And then, of course, from a basketball standpoint, he was able to go to practice and games with his dad, watch the professional Italian players, notice their footwork, notice how they played the game, where they were on the floor, how they moved their feet and their arms and their legs to get the shots the way they wanted to get them. And he gets an up close look at that. And that really informs himself. That informs his game as an athlete. I had more than one person who played against Kobe in the NBA tell me no player ever had better footwork in the NBA than Kobe Bryant did. He could put himself in a position on the floor and get himself to spots on the floor to shoot the ball from anywhere. And that was all drilling footwork technique for hours and hours and years and years.
That was helped by him studying the NBA tapes. I think it was his uncle that sent him from America. He would watch those just like you and I would watch TV as kids. Like he would watch Magic or Bird. I think he wrote something about that. He would just wear out these videotapes.
Yeah, his grandfather would send them to him in Italy, and he would watch.
Yeah.
It was a lot of Magic Johnson, a lot of Michael Jordan, a lot of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a lot of Larry Bird, the greats of the game at the time that the family was living over there. And he would continue to do that when he was back in high school. He had kind of a quasi-girlfriend, and often on their dates, the two of them would sit on the Bryant's couch on a Friday night and watch basketball videos. Like, boy, Kobe, you're a real romantic there. You know, I mean, it's, but that's what he did. He was consumed with it in a way that I think is really unique for somebody that young, to know at that age that within your bones of what you wanted to do and what you were willing to do to get there is pretty remarkable. There was never a sense that Joe and Pam were the kind of sports parents that pressured Kobe into anything. It was all self-generated. It was all what he wanted to do. He was a searcher in a lot of respects, but when it came to basketball, he knew what he wanted to do and who he wanted to be. It was simply a matter of putting himself on that path.
When he was in Italy, he played with older kids, didn't he?
Yes,
you
he did.
Mentioned in your book, and I think that made his maturation level speed up exponentially when he started playing with older, more experienced kids, and even men he would play against.
Yeah, the family would come home every summer, and he would play in spring and summer, and he would play in the Sunny Hill League in Philadelphia, which was kind of the premier summer league for basketball prodigies in the Philly area. You know, you start playing when you're 11 or 12 years old, you play through till you're finished with high school. And actually, his first year there, his first summer, Kobe didn't score a single point. He was playing up. He was playing up a level against 14-year-olds when he was 12, but he didn't score a single point. And that, he felt like he had shamed the family. He had shamed his father's good name. His uncle Chubby Cox was a legend in Philadelphia as well. He had shamed Chubby, and that motivated him to improve his game. And one of the ways, one of the primary ways that he would improve his game was, as you said, Michael, play up. He would play against men. He would play against older kids, and people describe that he kind of had an older person's game with the way he shot and the way he moved. There wasn't a lot of wasted movement. Usually with young players, they're kind of like a wild stallion or something like that. They're kind of out of control. And Kobe was never out of control, when it came to the moves that he made on a court.
Which helped him when he first started high school, because he played varsity at a very young age. How did he go about going to Lower Merion first, I should ask?
Well, I mean, obviously there was interest in him from big private, high schools that recruited in the Philly area. But and Joe looked into that a little bit. But I think it was important to him and to Kobe to just, you know what? He's going to be successful no matter where he's at. He's just going to go to his community high school. And that first year, as Kobe's still kind of adjusting, bear in mind, Lower Merion, if you say Lower Merion in the Philadelphia area, there are certain stereotypes and connotations that come with that. It's a school on the main line of Philadelphia, just outside it, which connotates old money, wasps, that sort of thing. When it's actually, it's a very economic, there are some very, trust me, there are some very posh, rich areas of the main line in Lower Merion Township, but it's far more racially and socioeconomically diverse than it gets credit for. So Kobe was kind of pulled in some different directions there when he gets to Lower Merion. He's, can he hang out with the white kids? Can he hang out with the black kids? Where is he finding his niche? When he first shows up at the high school, his two older sisters are still there. And when they pass each other in the hallway, they speak Italian to each other. Both because it's the language they feel most comfortable with, and because nobody else can understand them. It's kind of their shared, things they can say things to each other and nobody knows what they're saying. their shared lingo. But basketball was his way in to the culture of the school. And he's a terrific student and he likes rap music. And so he's interested in all different kinds of music, and he's able to kind of move in these different worlds a little bit and get along in time with students from just about any group. But with respect to basketball, it took some adjusting because he shot the ball pretty much every time he touched it as a freshman. And the team went 4-20, which ought to be impossible if you have Kobe Bryant on your team and you lose 20 of the 24 games in your season. But the other players on the team resented him. They looked at him and said, who's this freshman? Who does this kid think he is? Can come in here and shoot all the time like he does. But the coach, Greg Downer, was going to give Kobe that freedom because he trusted early on that, you know, we've got an incredible talent here. We've basically got the next Michael Jordan in our gym. And I'm gonna get out of his way. I'm gonna give him some direction and some instruction and some barriers, so to speak, but otherwise I'm just going to let him do his thing. And, you know, sophomore year, the team turns it around. They go 16-6. And before you know it, they're pointed towards a state championship his senior year.
You know, it's funny that you said that about how his coach Downer would let him shoot, and just reminds me of his rookie season when, even though he complained about Del Harris, Kobe's last game was a playoff loss in Utah. And he threw up a lot of air balls at the end, and he kept shooting, and they kept letting him shoot because they knew that he was shooting for the future.
Yes.
And it's the same kind of situation that they did in high school. I found it really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting you point that out because once I got some reporting done on that night, that scene, I knew that that's where I wanted to end the book. Not to spoil the ending, but
sorry.
No, it's okay. The first chapter begins with the helicopter crash.
Yeah.
The last chapter ends the book with a plane landing successfully. It's the Lakers team plane after that game against Utah, game 5, where Kobe throws up 4 air balls in the closing seconds of regulation and into overtime. And the Lakers team plane lands at 2:00 in the morning, and while he's on the plane, he calls his agent's assistant, Alyssa Grabow, and says, do whatever you have to do, but get Palisades High School's gym open. I'm going to go shoot. Yeah. And after the plane lands, he doesn't go home. He drives straight to the gym. The gym is open, and he's in there by himself shooting, working on his game. And that's where the book ends, because that's the scene that shows you what's to come. You know, wow. Yeah, he shot 4 air balls, but he's going to work at it and he's going to figure it out immediately. And his career takes off from there. And so, yeah, it's interesting you pointed out that scene, because that's where I wanted the book to end.
That's great. It's a great ending too. Earlier, you just mentioned, you'd mentioned him as a student briefly. And here's a photo of him in classroom that's in your book. Mm-hmm. He's a different kid. He is not Kobe he's not Mamba, not Mamba yet, but he's completely different as a student. If you can enlighten us what he was like, because you did a lot of research on this, and I was really impressed with this.
Thanks. Yeah, he was a terrific student. At the time, the SATs were based on 1,600 points. He scored 1080. There was a lot of scuttlebutt about whether he might go to Duke University to play for Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski. He could have gone to Duke and been an aeronautical engineer if he wanted to. He took an honors English class his 10th grade year and grew very close to his teacher in that class, Jean Mastriano. And pardon me, she remained a mentor to him for years thereafter. And one of the things that they dealt with in that class was the hero's journey. They read Odysseus, they read the Odyssey and the Iliad. And, Mastriano was one of these kind of cool English teachers who would show Star Wars in class and talk to the students about Luke Skywalker's hero's journey. And Kobe was completely taken with that. And so that he saw himself on that journey is what Mastriano told me. And it was easy for him to move in that world. You know, he was very bright. Someone told me in the book that Kobe was always one step ahead of everybody else, that he was kind of operating on this different plane from everybody else, both academically in some ways, not that he was a straight A student or scored 1600 boards, but was really sharp and really smart, challenged teachers, questioned them in good, smart ways. And when it came to basketball and his nature to be driven to become a great player, he was doing things at that time that you just don't see 14, 15, 16-year-old kids do. There's an anecdote in the book that one of his friends told me that when Kobe was 14, 15 years old, this friend was already a freshman at Temple. He had, his name's Anthony Gilbert, and he had met the Bryant family through Kobe's Sharia. And he and Kobe got to be friends. And the two of them would drive around to basketball courts in and around the city of Philadelphia, and they would play hoops, but they would play a particular kind of hoops. Kobe would work on his footwork, and he'd dunk, and he'd shoot 3-pointers, and he'd drill himself in the game. And Anthony had two jobs. He was to rebound all of Kobe's shots, and he was to scream at Kobe, "You're soft. You go to a white school. You're not black enough or tough enough to play in the Philadelphia Public League." He would scream these things at Kobe at Kobe's request, because Kobe wanted to kind of put this emotional armor on himself for the kinds of things, the kinds of taunts that he was already starting to hear, that he would continue to hear throughout his high school career, and that he was certain he was going to hear once he got to the NBA.
Wow. He did a lot of things in that regard to prepare himself. And one of the things was actually a touching moment. He had enlisted a young girl to sing the national anthem at everything, which is very touching. However, it's part of his controlling his environment too.
Exactly.
He wanted to hear her sing the national anthem every time to make him up for the game.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. He asked her to do it. He petitioned basically the athletic department to let her do that, and she would do that. And he would close his eyes, and when she was finished singing, he would open his eyes and look up at her, and they would lock eyes after every anthem, and then boom, he was ready to go. There are a million little anecdotes like that. He had watched his father and all those Italian professional players ice their knees after games and practices to try to conserve their bodies, right? So he would do the same thing as an 11 or 12-year-old kid playing pickup ball. He'd finish a game and ice his knees. And all these other kids are looking around and I'm like, what is this dude doing? Like, who does he think he is, icing his knees? But in retrospect, they could see this was what he was preparing himself. He was preparing himself to take care of his body. And I'm doing what I've seen the pros do, and I'm going to do it too. He had watched Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wear those, trademark goggles. So Kobe for a while would wear goggles when he played, even though he didn't need them to see. It was little things like that at an early age that showed the path that he was on.
And his teammates could tell that. They could tell as they were playing with him. And you spoke to some of his teammates, didn't you?
I did. I spoke to as many of them as I could track down, given I only had a year to basically research and write the book. Some of them declined to talk to me, which I understood. Kobe's death was still a little too fresh for them. But a number of them were happy to talk to me. And I think they felt like that it was kind of time. And I think a lot of people at Lower Merion or affiliated with Lower Merion, whether they played basketball or not, felt this way, that it was kind of time for somebody to come along and tell the story of this portion of Kobe's life. There have been some other books written about him that dealt with, Lower Merion in some detail, but not in the kind of deep dive that I wanted to do. And Kobe is still a point of pride for that community in a big way. All those people, for the most part, they don't remember the Mamba. They don't remember the guy who won the 5 championships. They certainly, in some respects, are a little uncomfortable dealing with what, the sexual assault allegations in Aurora, Colorado, and some of the darker chapters of Kobe's life. They remember him as the kid who sat next to them in English class, or when they were on the basketball team bus and the bus was going over a bridge, over a body of water, that Kobe would white knuckle the seat because he was nervous about the bridge, about going over the bridge.
Yeah.
You know, or they remember the things he would do in practice, the ways he would challenge them, the way he was a demanding teammate, the way sometimes he was an unreasonable teammate, the laughs that they had with him, all those sorts of things that go into being someone's friend and classmate and teammate when you're in high school. That's how they hold on to those memories. And I think they wanted someone to come along and tell the Kobe story from that perspective because it meant that much to them.
Well, it's also telling that what you wrote, that he was so loyal to his teammates and his school. Obviously, he could have gone anywhere, and that's what kids do nowadays is they go anywhere. But Kobe chose to stay at Lower Merion the whole time and play with his teammates. In fact, you had mentioned a brief thing in the story about how he brought two of his teammates to be co-captains with him. And one of them said, I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. The fact that he said he brought us to be co-captains with him.
Yeah, that was his junior year. The coaches had picked Kobe to be the only team captain. And the two senior leaders on the team, the starting guards, Evan Monsky and Guy Stewart, were a little taken aback by that. And Monsky in particular resented it. He kind of wanted to be a team captain. He thought he deserved it. And then early in the season, Kobe goes out to half court for, the handshake at the beginning of the game with the opposing team's captains, and he brings Evan and Guy out with him. And after that they did that every game thereafter. And as you said, Evan always remembered that, he told me, I never got to tell him what that meant to me. I never got the opportunity to say that to him. And he was very loyal. It was kind of refreshingly old school in that regard. He liked going to Lower Merion. He liked going to the community high school. If he had, as you said, Michael, if he had been a high school student now, he probably would be at a basketball factory like a Montverde Academy or an IMG Academy in Florida. There are any number of basketball powerhouses in the Los Angeles area, for instance, that would have fit that bill if he'd grown up in LA, that he could, go to a school miles and miles away from his hometown high school, but he wanted to be in the community. And it was reciprocated to him. Lower Merion had not been anything close to a basketball powerhouse in a long time. They hadn't won a state championship in 53 years before they won one Kobe's senior year. It mattered more to them that it was to the people of the community that it was happening there. He could have gone anywhere and he stayed there. I think I used the line in the book, he was at once of the community and apart from it.
You had mentioned the state championship, and even though that we all, if you knew the story, you knew the result, it was still exciting to read about. And especially the rivalries he had with schools like Chester and other schools, because, one telling story about one of the coaches said, if we hold him to 15 points, we're going to beat him by 30. And what does he do? He stays at 15 points and he spends the rest of the game passing to his teammates, and they end up winning big. I thought that was pretty funny. But it's just his high school experience, he seemed to enjoy it tremendously. Yeah,
I think he did. And I think he enjoyed it inherently for what it was, right? He was concerned about his grades, but not to the point that he would stress out about them. He considered them a challenge. He says at one point to the assistant basketball coach at Lower Merion, that he's getting math tutoring because the math class is challenging. And pardon my language, but he tells the coach, this shit is fun. And that's how he approached academics. And if he sacrifices anything, I think he sacrifices a little bit of his social life. He doesn't have a really, really, really close group of friends. As I said earlier, he kind of can move in and out of different kinds of crowds and groups of people. He doesn't party much. There's an anecdote in there about him accompanying a group of girls and guys to a house party nearby. And it's the first time he kind of goes to one of these things and he kind of loosens up a little bit. The night of the state championship game, Lower Merion wins in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour and a half from Lower Merion. The team bus drives them back after the game. They're all going to go to the cheerleaders, popular cheerleaders' house to celebrate the big win. They're going to be there all night to party. And Kobe stays 1 hour and goes home. You know, and in some ways, you could see him as being kind of lonely in that regard, because he was so focused on his basketball career. The teacher I mentioned, Jeannie Mastriano, had a kind of a chilling line in there. She said that he told me that often he would dribble himself to sleep. And, you know, I think, again, that was important to me to get that aspect of Kobe's life in there, because I think that segues nicely to who he was with the Lakers. Again, apart from them in so many ways, and so many questions and mystery about his interaction with other people.
And then there's basketball, of course. We haven't really talked about basketball as much, but there's some great stories that you wrote in his encounters with pros, and, you know, the Jerry Stackhouses, the Vernon Maxwells. And I found it really fascinating. If you can share one or two anecdotes without revealing too much about. Kobe played with a lot of pros in Philadelphia in the summer leagues.
Yeah, well, in the summer of 1995, Kobe gets invited by John Lucas, who at the time is the Sixers head coach, to come scrimmage and play pickup with the Sixers and these NBA and Division I college players at St. Joseph's University, right? This is kind of what the NBA players do in the summer. They're playing pickup every day. All these players in the Philly area are there in St. Joe's gym. And among them is Jerry Stackhouse, who was the team's first-round draft pick the year before, thought to be the savior of the Sixers at the time.
Yeah.
And he and Kobe are going toe-to-toe every day. Now, there's been a lot of mythology about that summer. And Stackhouse ever since has kind of lived with the ignominy of people thinking that Kobe just spent the summer dunking on Stackhouse the entire time. You know, when Kobe was 16, 17 years old and Stackhouse was 20 and already an NBA player. That's not exactly what happened. Kobe got the best of him some days. Stack got the best of him some other days. There were some great one-on-one battles between Kobe and Vernon Maxwell. And there's one anecdote where I think it's Willie Burton, who was kind of a journeyman NBA player at the time, who was with the Sixers, scored 53 points in one game for the Sixers in the regular season. He and Kobe are on opposite sides of a team, opposite teams in a pickup game, and Burton scores on him and for the first basket of the game and taunts him coming back down the floor. And Kobe just destroys him the rest of the game, just absolutely annihilates him. And Burton leaves. He just walks out of the gym after the game and doesn't come back. So that summer was transformative to Kobe. It reaffirmed for him, you know, not only can I play in the NBA and can I be a great player in the NBA, but I think I can be a great player in the NBA right away. I don't have to go to college. I don't have to go to Duke or LaSalle or North Carolina or Kentucky. I can make the jump straight from high school to the league. And once he gets through that summer, man, forget college. He is full bore on, you know, becoming a pro right out of high school.
Wow. And as we wrap this up, I'm just wondering, through your whole experience writing this incredible book, it's just, you know, what kind of sense did you get from him, or, you know, what did you learn that you didn't know about Kobe, or was there anything that surprised you or anything like that?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, I picked up tidbits here and there, which I think make the book really interesting in some ways. Like, for instance, when he came back to America in the fall of 1991, it was in 8th grade. He played baseball for his middle school team, which, you know, Kobe and Michael Jordan get compared all the time. And there was another point of similarity that I didn't know about. I'm not sure anybody knew about, that Kobe was a baseball player too. But what's interesting about it is that I dug up his yearbook from his 8th grade year, and there's a team picture of the baseball team. And there were 18 kids in the photo, and 17 of them are wearing the team uniform and a hat and wearing a glove. And the only one who isn't is Kobe. Kind of tells you all you need to know about, you know, whether he thought his future was in baseball or somewhere else. I think what I was most taken aback in the main, Michael, was just how driven he was so early in his life. I kept coming back to that. Like, that, I kept thinking about me as a 14 or 15-year-old. As you said earlier, Kobe and I are of similar ages. I'm 3 years older.
Mhm.
And I just kept thinking, gosh, at 14 or 15, I had so many struggles, like, I don't know, trying to talk to a girl, for God's sake. And he just was so confident about who he wanted to be and what he wanted to do when it came to basketball that in some ways, I couldn't comprehend it. And I think that speaks a lot to who he became as an adult, both for good and
Mhm.
for bad in some ways. The way he struggled to get along with teammates, the way, as we said earlier, struggled to interact with people at times. That was my goal in writing the book, was to be able to lay kind of a baseline for people to pick this book up a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, pick it up tomorrow and read it and say, you know what? Now I get Kobe, because I read this book on the first 17 years of his life, and this gives me the insight into who he was when he was 25, when he was 35, right up to the moment that he left this earth.
And I think we did get Kobe out of this, thanks to you. I'd like to close with one anecdote, if you could share. It's about Sonny Vaccaro and him.
Yes.
And it was a very touching moment. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Which one?
So
if
Sonny
you could talk.
Yeah, sure. So Sonny Vaccaro was, people might know his name as kind of the sneaker mogul who signed Michael Jordan to Nike in 1984, and he was working for Adidas in the early to mid 1990s, and he signed Kobe to his first sneaker contract. And Sonny had made his bones as a basketball promoter. He had created what was called the Dapper Dan Classic, which was kind of the precursor to the McDonald's All-American game, where the best high school players play in this all-star game every year. And Sonny also created the ABCB camp, which was a 3 or maybe week-long summer basketball camp at Farley Dickinson University in Teaneck, New Jersey, in North Jersey. And it was the prime event for high school basketball players in the summertime, usually juniors and seniors. And Sonny was from Western Pennsylvania, the son of Italian immigrants, very personable, storyteller, kind of exaggerated kind of guy. And he had known Joe Bryant. Joe had played in the Dapper Dan Classic, and Kobe shows up to the ABCD camp one year, his junior year, and he plays great. And he says goodbye to Sonny at the end of the camp, and he gives him a big hug and says, I'm going to come back next year and be the MVP of the camp. And he, one second, he says to Sonny, as he's hugging him, he uses an Italian phrase, "Cio di vole." I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it basically means until we meet again. Be safe until we meet again. And Sonny's mother had used that phrase with him when Sonny was a kid. And now here was Kobe using it with him now. And Sonny always remembered that. And it led to kind of the cementing of their relationship, such that when Kobe came back the following year, entering his senior year, he was by far and away the best player at the camp. It convinces Sonny Vaccaro that Kobe's going to be the next MJ. I got to sign this kid to a sneaker contract. I got to get him for Adidas. And of course he does. And Sonny also helps pave the way for Kobe to end up with the Lakers coming out of the 1996 draft.
That's a great story, and it's a great book. The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. Mike Sielski, thank you very much for joining us.
Michael, it was a pleasure. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who tuned in.
Thank you, and have a nice evening, everyone.